Welcome to the Magnolia Component Personalization webinar. I'm Zach Grant. Here with me today is Antti Hitala. Most of you are familiar with Antti. If not directly, then when you've read the Magnolia documentation, you will have seen his writing and read his wise words. Antti's been with Magnolia for quite some years now. He's now focusing on product management. And one of his last major projects was to shepherd work on the component personalization features in Magnolia 5.4.9. Today, he's going to walk you through some of the use cases, some of the reasons why we made choices that we made, and give you a good overview of what you can do and why this new set of features matters to you. We're going to ask that you hold your questions until the end, unless, of course, something isn't clear. In that case, please use the questions feature of the GoToMeeting control panel to post your question. Also, once we get to the end and you've got questions, use the same feature to let us know what more you'd like to hear about. And with that, my portion of this webinar, at least until we get to questions, is mostly over, and I will happily hand things over to Antti.
Thank you, Zach, and also welcome on my part. I hope you can hear me well. Let's go ahead and jump into the agenda right away. As Zach said, today we're going to look at component personalization. It's a new feature in Magnolia, and we're going to kick it off with a demo. I'll show how it works, and I'm glad to see that there are digital marketers in the audience. As this is not a very technical webinar, we're going to look at functionality, how you work with it, and I'll give you as many use cases and ideas as I have been able to think for using personalization, how you can make good use of it. Towards the end, we're going to look at some good to know issues, such as which Magnolia edition is personalization available, in which capacity, how caching works, what gets cached, and where you can download a bundle that has personalization. And of course, there's room for your questions. So I'm going to go ahead and start this with a demo. I'm going to exit the slides and go to my Magnolia instance here locally. And I'm just going to slowly walk you through the personalization functionality, how you work with it in the UI, and what you see as you go forward. I'm going to launch the Pages app here. And in the travel demo project, which is the fictional travel agency that we use to showcase and sell and demonstrate Magnolia, we have couple of personalization examples. So let's open the travel homepage. And the first change that we've done is this travel homepage used to be an example of page-based personalization. We created 3 different variants of this page and targeted them to geographical segments, one for Americas, another for Asia, a third for Europe. And now that component personalization as a feature is available, what we changed is we turned those variants into component variants. And you can still see here when you're in the page tree that the page has that familiar variants icon. And that's a cue to you that there is some personalized content on the page. But when you expand the tree, you don't see the variants here anymore because there are no page variants. They are component variants. You see the same icon on the component that is personalized. So it's this carousel at the top of the page. Let me make some more real estate on the screen there. So this is the carousel that promotes a few tours, Dolomites on bike, Dubai and Oman, and so on. So for an anonymous user, we show the original version of the component. Here on the component toolbar, you have this drop down that shows the original kind of default or fallback content of the component and the variants that exist. So this component has the original plus 3 variants. And the way you edit and create a variant is very similar to how you used to do it with the page variants. On the action bar on the right, we have now new actions for adding a component variant. And if you are in a particular variant, you can edit it just like you would the original. The familiar edit action is available here in the component toolbar as well. So when I click it, I get the components edit dialog. In this case, we're looking at an Americas targeted variant. So for those visitors who come to the Americas geo, we show a few tours and US West Coast, diving in the Bahamas and beach in Brazil. And the same goes for the other segments. You can see that the same drop-down that is in the component toolbar is also for convenience here in the dialog. So when you make change to a particular variant, you don't have to save your changes, go back, choose another. You can flip through those variants here quite quickly. There's the Asia one, and there's the Euro variant. You see that the content changes, the tours that we promote to each geo change. And the way you assign an audience to a variant also works the same as with pages. So we're trying to reduce the time it takes to learn new things. Here I'm looking at the Americas variant, and the familiar choose audience action is in the action bar. When I click it, I get this light dialog where I can choose an audience segment if I have existing segments, or some individual traits. And however I name the audience, the variant gets named. So let's do an example. Let's create a new variant. Add component variant. And you can see that it got an automatic name that isn't very informative yet. But once I choose an audience for it, I have the option to say, I target this to, for example, Nordic countries. And I might add a fictional segment here. And once I'm done, the variant gets named according to my choice. So that's how assigning an audience works. You can, in addition to segments, you can choose individual traits like you used to be able to. Magnolia ships with a handful of default traits out of the box. We have a date there, a country, visitor, and then a cookie trait. But in reality, where do you mostly likely get your traits? Probably from a third-party system, such as a marketing automation system. And those of you who said, yes, I've worked with personalization in the poll, that's probably what you've done. You've tapped into a CRM system or some marketing automation system to find characteristics of users and use those for personalization. If you're interested in developing a trait, have a look at the Magnolia documentation. There's a tutorial for creating custom traits. And there's also, in the marketplace, there's a module called a runtime-based personalization, which allows you to do traits based on cookie values. That might come useful. So if head over to marketplace.magnoliacms.com to find out. But let's move on with the demo and preview our example here. I'm going to delete that Nordic variant, which I used as an example, and let's go play through the preview of this feature. Select the travel page and preview as visitor. So here I am looking at the home page and the carousel as an anonymous persona. This is the familiar persona drop down on the right. And as an anonymous user, I don't come knowingly from a particular geo segment. So I get a selection of tours in Europe, in the Americas, in Asia. But as soon as I choose, for example, a persona from the Americas geo, I get a selection of US tours, West Coast Highway, Brazil, and Bahamas. For a user from Asia, we show a selection of Asian tours, such as Vietnam and Indonesia. So this is how we swapped the familiar page variant example to a component variant example. And I showed you how to edit those variants. Now, we haven't forgotten the page-based example though. It's still very much valid, but we moved it to another page because we think component personalization is a more relevant feature. So if you're still interested in learning how page variants work, down here on the contact page, I have an example that has 3 geo-targeted page variants. So let's open that page as well. I'm going to open the page, and roughly in the middle of the page we have this section of contact phone numbers for our fictional travel agency. For the anonymous user, the not known user, we show all possible geo segments since we don't know where they're coming from. But this component is personalized. So let me select the component. Here you see that we have a column layout. The component shows 3 different versions. If you come from the Americas, you only see America's phone numbers. If from the Asia Pacific, you see Asia Pacific phone numbers. And since we're looking at page variants here, those variants are here at the top of the page. You don't see them at that particular component. But let's play through that scenario as well. So I'm going to preview the page as a visitor. Here we go. Anonymous user sees all 3 geo segments. A user from the US gets phone numbers that are relevant to him. And a user from Asia gets the Asia Pacific phone numbers. That's just a simple example of how you can do page variants and why they still need to work. The reason why we think component variants is better, though, is that we spoke to quite a few of you. We spoke to clients who use personalization and who would like to use it but feel that it doesn't work well enough in Magnolia today. And the overwhelming majority of you said, we like to use component variants because there is less content that I'm varying, less content that I'm changing. When I change a whole page, I still, at the variant level, want to change a small detail. And I'm copying a lot of content from the parent page. And at this point, I want to give a big shout out to those of you who have been the pioneers and went ahead and developed component personalization feature on your own and helped me understand what works and what doesn't. Guys from Aperto, guys from Proximus, you did wonderful work on showing your designs at the conference a couple of years ago. And those interviews fed into what we have today. So I'm really hoping that this feature already benefits your clients and that we can make it better together. So let's move on to a third example in the travel demo that shows personalization not based on geographical segments, but on user behavior, on user preference. And for this demo, I'm going to go on the public instance to show how it works in practice. So here on the home page, we have this component that asks, which tour type are you? Active, cultural, or off the beaten path? We ask the user to serve relevant content to them. But once that question has been answered, we don't really need to show this component anymore. What we do instead is we get rid of that component, and the next time the user returns to the home page, we show them content that is relevant to their choice. So let's say that I'm interested in cultural travel. I click cultural. At this point, Magnolia stores my preference as a cookie. There's a cookie called tour type where we set the value cultural. Now I browse through the site and I look at a few interesting tours, such as this one in Malaysia. And when I eventually return to the home page, that now redundant question is gone, and I see some featured cultural tours since they are based on my preference for cultural travel. We've made it obvious in the demo that this is a cookie-based preference, and you can clear it here if you want. But this is a very powerful example of how to act on user preferences and so relevant content, and it's based on a realistic content. One of our travel industry client uses exactly these scenarios. When visitors go and search for a holiday in Disneyland, for example, look at a hotel, and eventually either in that session, in the next session, return to the home page, they show them a picture of Disneyland or the destination that they looked at, and that's a powerful reminder that this is the holiday I was searching for. I may have a hotel booking that I dropped, a shopping cart that I left unused. And that's why we wanted to build a behavior-based example in the demo. It avoids serving stagnant, no longer relevant content to the user. The next time they come, they see something that is more relevant and not the same again. And it also works in a scenario where, let's say someone comes to your site and sees an interesting piece of content. They go to your landing page and download something. Now they've kind of converted and become a lead. But what happens when that lead comes back to your site and sees the exact same content offered again? Well, in all likelihood, they're going to ignore it, because the relationship between your website and the client is kind of a living thing. It should evolve over time, and every time you show those leads content that they've already consumed, you're missing an opportunity to move them further down the customer journey. Let's have a look at how that example is built. So for this example, I'm going to go back to the author instance, and let's build it together. It's only going to take a minute since it's fairly simple. Here I am on the travel homepage, and I'm looking at that question component. Which tour type are you? This is a component that we don't need to show again, so let's create a variant of it. Add component variant. And I'm going to delete the content of this variant. I basically want to show empty content for those visitors whose tour type preference is known. And I'm going to assign an audience, choose audience, call it tour type is known, and use one of our cookie traits. So I choose a cookie trait called tour type. And as long as tour type has any value, such as active or cultural, I'm going to serve that empty content, basically an empty slot. So we're done with the first one. We have original content, asking the question, and we have content for those visitors whose tour type is known. So what do we show instead? Let's feature some tours of the preferred type. I'm going to add another component on the page that's called featured tours by tour type. Add it after the first component. And this is kind of an automated component that acts on that preferred choice. And again, I'm going to create a variant of it. Choose an audience for the variant. Tour type is known. Use the same cookie trait. Tour type has any value. Pick my audience. And the variant gets named. Tour type is known, just like it did. And in order to hide the original, when we don't know the value yet, I have an action here that says hide or show original. This is a very cool feature to show exclusive content. You can hide the original component from everybody else except a particular matching audience. And you can imagine that this was very handy when you want to, for example, reward visitors who come from a newsletter campaign, show them maybe a coupon or some exclusive content. And as I spoke to you and other clients, we will build this feature, everybody said that you need to have the option to hide the original content and show exclusive content only. So that's available now. I'm clicking this action and the original is marked as hidden. And that's it, basically we're done. So let's play through the scenario. Gonna preview the page, travel home, preview as a visitor. I'm gonna hide those personas since I don't need them right now. Clear my preference there. Okay, which tour type are you? At first I'm asked the question. I say cultural, browse another cultural tour, and on return to the home page, the redundant question is gone, and now I see featured cultural tours because that matches my preference. So those are the three examples that the travel demo has. It has an example of the tour carousel, a very straightforward personalized component by geographical segments. It has an example of page variants on the contacts page, those phone numbers for Asia Pacific, Europe, and so on. And the third example is this cookie-based preference example where we act on the behavior of the user and try to show narrower, more relevant content when they return to the home page. Let's go back to the presentation slides and talk a little bit about why now is the right time to do personalization. Based on our research and research done by Gartner, personalization is just now hitting the mainstream at many companies. The slide I have here is called the hype cycle for digital marketing. It's kind of a curve that shows various new technologies, digital technologies, and how commonplace they are in the market. And you can see that it starts with a kind of a steep incline that is called the innovation trigger. That's the leftmost part of the curve here. And then we hit the peak of inflated expectations where things are really hyping up. There's early publicity for cool technologies, some success stories, but many failures. And at this point, some companies take action on these technologies, but most don't. And what happens after is this steep decline. It's called the trough of disillusionment. And at this point, interest kind of wanes as implementations fail to deliver. Some producers of the technology shake out of the market or fail completely. And 2 years ago, 2014, personalization was there. It was in the middle of the slope. Now, in a year to 2015, personalization has moved out of that depressing trough and is now moving towards actual plateau productivity. And now we're at 2016 and we're probably a little bit further along. Gartner hasn't published their graph for this year yet. But what I'm trying to show with this diagram is that personalization is now becoming mainstream. Some companies dabbled with it, tried it, really innovative clients put it into production, but the productivity and the revenues kind of failed to materialize. But now we're getting there. And as we now deliver component personalization about 2-3 years after we put page personalization in production in Magnolia, we initially had the feeling that we may be a little bit late. But talking to clients, talking to partners, this turned out not to be the case. This is exactly the right time to do personalization and start working with it. And if you feel that you are late or behind the curve, you're not. This is the right time to do it. The tools are more mature now. They are widely available. Most mainstream mid-market CMSs have personalization tools. It's not only Magnolia. From a tools perspective, there's no need to wait. There are second and third generation personalization implementations now in place that are better, more intuitive, and more comfortable to work with. And the third bullet on this slide is there's a wealth of data about visitors, which also makes it easier to work with personalization. So much of us as visitors is now known. Much of what we do on the web gets collected, gets recorded, and is available through APIs, through marketing automation systems. So now is the right time to act. There are tools out there, and there's a wealth of data about visitors that you can tap into and start personalizing. However, there is one valid excuse why personalization is still hard, and that's the scalability issue. So while there are tools, while there is data about visitors, scaling is still difficult, and this is a real issue. It's a content production issue. You can imagine that if content needs to be personalized to different audiences or even different individuals, who is going to write all that content? There's going to be so much of it. Who will write all those variants? If you think of this as a content production problem, then it's very real. Creative content needs to be authored. It takes people, it takes time, and when you have many variants of it, it takes even more time. There are solutions such as using natural language generation to generate content, but for longer pieces of narrative that are human-like text, natural language generation can only go so far. You can create maybe product descriptions that are fairly similar from one product to another, but creating prose text, yeah, that's not so easy. But if you look at this issue as a content management problem rather than content production problem, there are some solutions. One of those is trying to make your content modular. making smaller pieces of reusable content. And at this point, I want to show you, if you're not already familiar with the Magnolia apps idea, we have this content app framework where you can create small pools of reusable content. And the demo also has example of it as the tours. So if you open the tours app, you can see that each individual tour's description and properties are managed in a separate workspace, in a separate app. It's not part of the page content. So it's a way of modularizing, making the content smaller and more reusable. And we are reusing these little content nuggets in many places all over the site. We show them on a tour detail page. We show them in teasers. We show them on tour overviews in varying lengths and extents. Another mechanism for making content more reusable is, of course, tagging. If you're good at tagging, you can apply different taxonomies and categories to your content nuggets. This particular tour to Kyoto is tagged as ecotourism and off-path. And if you apply those tags to content in a methodical way, you can combine different sets of content that may appeal to different audiences. So as solutions to this content management problem, I would offer trying to make your content modular and then tagging it for reuse. But I admit that it's a hairy issue. Not only do you have to address different segments of audiences, but it gets more tricky as you need to reach what are called audiences of one. These are individual people. As visitors, consumers tend to expect content to be relevant to them as an individual, not as a part of a segment. A segment is still a perfectly valid concept for understanding your audience, but it still lumps many people into the same bucket. As an example of how you can reach an individual and try to tailor content relevant to them, I'd give this example from the travel industry again. We have a travel client who does something very clever with the visitors' holiday searches. When you go to the site and you search for your dream holiday, the site appends your search terms into a cookie. Your search terms are typically things like the destination you want to go to, your travel dates, the number of adults, a number of kids who are on the trip, and so on. And as you keep searching and looking for your best destination, this travel company keeps adding this information, all these searches, into the cookie. And with such a detailed search history, you can get a more reliable picture of what type of travel the visitor is actually looking for or interested in. It's kind of hyper-specific, but in a thoughtful way, because it avoids the company also from jumping to conclusions. Because let's say you go to a site and you look for a holiday to the Bahamas. If you do that once, you may be doing it just out of curiosity or even as a favor for a friend. But once you do that repeatedly, it becomes a more frequent pattern. Then it shows that there's a genuine interest to it, and it starts to make sense to personalize content to that visitor, showing similar or featured tours of that type. And with this little joke, I try to caution you to avoid thinking that engaging the customer is the same as repetition, serving the same content. It isn't. The content still needs to be relevant to the user, not just the repeated content. So here Amazon is offering you another wallet once you've already bought one. There's a fine line somewhere between items that are typical repeat purchases and what makes sense for you to repeat, and items that you only buy once. If you buy a wallet, you probably won't buy another one right after, but if you apply, let's say, a book, a Harry Potter book, then another book might be just as appropriate as a suggestion. Switching gears again, I'm showing here a graph from HubSpot. It's a company that specializes in inbound marketing, educating us, digital marketers, about ways to bring visitors into your site. And this inbound methodology is basically, the idea is that marketing brings visitors in rather than marketers having to go out to get the prospect's attention. And here, what you see here in the graph is, if you go from left to right, is kind of a customer journey. It's a helpful thinking tool where you have different stages along the journey, and all those stages are good opportunities for personalization. You just need to personalize different things. This graph happens to be a kind of a box, it's a rectangle, but you could also think of it as a narrowing funnel, where as the visitor moves from a stranger to a converted to a closed client, the content that you serve to them gets narrower and more focused and more relevant as we move to the right. And Adobe's research says that the average consumer goes through a minimum of 5 touch points with a business before they convert. So that means it's a very long customer journey. You need to carefully design how and what kind of content you serve at each touch point to make the digital experience relevant. So let's use these stages on the journey to come up with some use cases and ideas of how you could use personalization. So attract, convert, close, and delight. For example, at the stage where you're trying to attract visitors, they are still really fairly strange to you. You don't know each other, but that visitor might come from a social media campaign, for example, on Twitter or Facebook. And since you set up that campaign, you know where they came from. You could, for example, based on a URL attribute, greet them. Even if you were just saying, hi Facebook user, it's already more relevant than just serving anonymous content. At the convert stage, you could personalize a call to action at the end of a blog post. Let's say you have a blog post describing your product or offering. To create a couple of different variants of it. Create a different call to action at the end for somebody who's a stranger and for somebody who already knows your product. Let's say you might want to offer a white paper or an ebook download to a new visitor, but promote a webinar instead for somebody who already knows you and what your product is all about. So for example, in this webinar, all of you there listening now know already Magnolia fairly well. You know what the company produces, you know what the product is like, and you're interested in a particular feature, today component personalization. So your content needs are different from somebody who's completely new. You could, at the close stage, do small courteous things such as adding the first name of the recipient to an email newsletter you send to boost click-through rate. Forrester's research says that personalized emails improve click-through rates by 14% and conversion rates by 10%. And that's not insignificant. 14% improvement is quite a bit. Upsell is another interesting case where you can personalize content. Upsell means you're trying to offer a more profitable item to the user, more profitable for you. So this is the classic case, and when you go buy a hamburger, they ask you, would you like fries with that? That's an upsell. The salesperson is trying to sell you a meal, a more valuable option of the same offering. You can also expose customers to other options that they might not consider in order to make a more profitable sale. And I have an example of this. So let's jump out of the slides and look at another example. This is not part of the travel demo, but I put it in there just for this webinar. And pardon me, but I have to switch a few traits to get there. So I'm going to delete the tour type trait that I used before and put another trait in place. I'm going to knock out this tour type trait from here, delete. And import another set of traits. And one more import there. Okay. Now let's go back to the Pages app. I built a little example here as on a page called Upsell. So imagine that you have a component that offers 3 different levels of subscription. These could be subscription to an internet line or to a phone package or whatever you have. And here we have 4 options. We have a column layout component that is personalized. It has an original component with 4 options and 2 variants. And in the variants, I'm changing the number of columns. If the current visitor, the customer, already has this plan S, then we're not going to bother promoting that again. Instead, we want to upsell them to the medium, large, or XL plan. So customer who has plan S sees only the next up options. Customer who already has plan medium sees the options up from there. This is a very simple example of using the upsell idea combined with component personalization. And let's play it through the scenario as a visitor. Upsell, preview as visitor. Here I am without knowledge of what plan I currently have, but if I select my current plan is small, I get the 3 options that are up from there. Or if I say my current plan is medium, I get a more profitable upsell. The reason why upselling is such a good idea is that it is 5 times more expensive to get a new customer as it is to hold to an existing one. So current customers is where the money is. You might be also familiar with the term cross-selling, but don't confuse the two. Upselling is different from cross-selling. Cross-selling is where you're selling a completely different product instead. And back to the slides, let's look at that last idea, which is delight. Now we're really at the end of the HubSpot rectangle. And to delight users, you might want to personalize the homepage, for example, for returning customers, like we did in that demo example where we don't ask the redundant question, what tour type are you anymore? Instead, we show something that the customer is known for. And 40% of revenue comes from returning or repeat purchases. This data comes from Forrester. And again, just like with upsell, it makes sense to sell to a known customer and take advantage of the attributes that you already know. So we walked through the examples and some use cases. Let's look at now of the availability of personalization in Magnolia. The way we've slotted into editions is with the Enterprise Edition standard, you can do only page variants. This is how it always was, and those page variants are not cached. With Enterprise Edition Pro, you can do page variants and component variants, and they do get cached with the Advanced Cache for Personalization module, which is bundled in Pro. However, there's a restriction that you can't do page and component variants on the same page. This has nothing to do with licensing, and we're trying to make it complicated for you. Instead, we're trying to make it easy for editors, because when you combine page variants and component variants within those page variants, you can come up with very complex scenarios that are hard to understand. They're hard for editors and digital marketers to understand what gets served when. And you might very well end up in scenarios where a particular page variant never gets requested, never gets served, and you create content under it that you really didn't need to create anyway. So try to keep your example simple, and with this intentional restriction, we're trying to kind of gently guide you towards simpler examples first. If you want to try component personalization, then it's available starting with Magnolia 5.4.9. With 5.4.9, we've provided bundles with and without component personalization, so you have a choice. You don't have to get it if you want to keep going on with the 5.4 series without it. But with Magnolia 5.5, which is due later this year, all bundles will have component personalization. So at that point, we're doing a major release, we're switching gears significantly and bundling it out of the box. If you are building your own bundle and you need to, in your POM file, you need to depend on the Magnolia Enterprise Pro component personalization web app, that little abbreviation there, CP13N, you'll find that in all bundles that have component personalization included. So that's a signal to you that this bundle has component personalization functionality. All right, we're coming to the end. Let's go to questions. What do we have there? Fire away.
Thanks, Antti. And so far, we have one question which is, I think, pretty important, and that is, how can you author content for variants that are multilingual? Could we show that, or at least discuss what needs to happen? Because, of course, the intersection of features adds complexity.
Yeah, the intention is that language variants and content variants for personalization work together harmoniously. So let's grab an example component. For example, what would be a good example? Here you can, within a language, you can also have variants. Both the drop-downs are in the dialog. So if you are in a situation where you have multi-language content, you can create combinations of the two. You can create a variant of the component where tour type is known in English and in German. There you saw that the title for German already existed. But like that.
Okay, next up, can you give some guidance on when it's appropriate to use content apps versus personalization, just even in general or in some specific cases?
Content apps are always a good idea when you have reusable content, even if you're not personalizing. For example, in the travel demo, we reuse those tours across many pages. So content app is a good idea for modular content in general, reusable content, for content that you might not want to use on web pages, but you want to use in multiple channels, perhaps in different channels. Let's say that you have an app, maybe a native app on a phone platform, and you want to retrieve content from Magnolia to show in that, or AngularJS app or React app. You can create a REST endpoint for that particular workspace where your content app is writing to and get content from there. And then it's content free from page context. It's completely presentation-free content that you can consume from an app or whatever device specific channel you might have. There's in Magnolia documentation, there's a special section for building apps. There's a very gentle My First Content App tutorial that follows the light development principles of building a simple app, and also some advice on when a content app makes sense. Why use apps, why flexibility, united look and feel, and these kind of factors benefit editors and benefit those who consume that content from somewhere else.
So what's the release date for 5.5?
5.5 will be released mid-November. I think we're hitting the 15th of November by current planning, and we seem to be on track for that.
And while I'm waiting for other questions to come in, I've got one for the audience. We've talked about a variety of different use cases for personalization. Are there use cases that you've used that we didn't talk about, or that you think are interesting and important to work that you're doing. I also, Auntie.
While the audience is thinking about that, how about that case, Zach, where one of our travel clients is using page-based personalization as a kind of a time machine? They create page variants of future campaigns and limit them by the date trait. So that, how do the editors work with that?
I forgot about that case, at least during this webinar. It's kind of a neat one. So one of the challenges when you're building a lot of campaigns, especially time-based campaigns, is that if you schedule publishing, you have to really plan carefully. You have to design your pages, schedule them to be published, and then if anything changes, you might have to unpublish them or not schedule them. And what we realized with how personalization works in Magnolia was that it was easy to set a general trait on a page that was a date. And at a certain date, you would get a different page variant. And what this lets people do is you can easily create a variant of a page for your Halloween campaign, your Christmas campaign, and so on. And then use the preview feature to be a visitor at that certain time. And it lets you browse, in effect, the future version of your site. You can easily have all of your campaigns content ready on the on the public instance waiting to go, and you can see what it'll look like when the right time arrives. You can, of course, set these date-based traits per page, but it makes even more sense to have a segment called something like Halloween campaign. And then you set the dates where the content would be available. Then, if you find you need to make a campaign happen early, or make a campaign run longer, or if you have a campaign that you know is going to happen at some point, like say that we have a campaign for the 5.5 release, pretty certain it's going to be November 15th. But if we're wrong, then we can easily push the date in just one place in the segment, and then have the 5, 10, 20, 500, however many other pages or components are involved, automatically show up at the right time. It really makes it easy for teams of editors to maintain complex sites with time-based content. Aha, I see other questions coming in. People always want more. I laugh because the question is a good one. But let's see what Auntie says. Is there a way to create variants for specific fields in a component? So not just a component variant, but a specific field inside of a component.
Today, no. But send me an email if that's critical to you, and try to describe the scenario. Of course, you could have a component that is very simple, that consists of one field, basically. And we have a component in the MTK that is just called image, I think. All it does is it renders an image of your choice from the DAM. And it may seem like a weird, simplistic component, but it gets asked a lot, really a lot, for clients who build simple single-page type of websites. They can just let us put an image there, nothing else, no titles, no subheadings, just an image. So I can imagine that you could have a component that renders something very simple, that has one field, and then you create variants of that component. But if it's important for you to create variants at a field level, then shoot us an email and describe your scenario.
I suppose I have another question, and that is, Auntie, could you share a write-up of your method for creating the cookie traits? Because I'm sure that folks saw that and thought, oh, that would be handy.
Yeah, configuring cookie traits, we can write it up. Yeah, let's add it to documentation. Absolutely. The bit that I didn't show in the travel demo example where we store, for example, cultural travel as a preference is that question component that asks you that question sets a cookie at the component script level. And I also want to turn that into a more general recipe and put it into documentation. So we have a nice library that is brought in as a JavaScript resource that can set a cookie. It's very simple to call from a template script, and we'll publish that, publicize it a little bit in documentation.
Excellent, thanks. All right, another question. So after Antti answered the question about field level personalization, someone else wrote, does this mean that personalization on a component level doesn't fall back to the original in the same way that translations would, or translated strings would fall back to the original?
That's correct. What we do today is the same we did with page variants, that when you create a variant, we copy the content from the original. And that means that if a field in the variant is not filled in or is empty, we don't fall back to the parent or the original content and show that instead. And we're doing this right now, but the next step on the personalization roadmap is to move away from this copying practice into a referencing practice, where for both page variants and component variants, we would give you the option to reference the original instead. And that's another step towards avoiding changing content in many places when something in the original changes. So let's say there's a field for a title in the original, you ripple it down to the variants, and now you realize that, yeah, actually that title should be changed in all variants. If you reference it from the original, then changing it in the original will be enough. So I know of this requirement. I've heard it from a few places, and it is definitely on the roadmap. We want to do it. We have a working proof of concept for it already, so it'll come. And to repeat the answer to your question, yes, it works differently from how languages work.
Another question has come in. I'm just asking for a clarification. So not seeing one yet, so I'll just go ahead with my assumption. The question was, can you do test and target with component personalization? And I imagine this is a reference to the Adobe Target product, which has an automated testing and targeting engine. And that's not what component personalization is about. It's not automating the rule set. It's instead providing a tools for you to deliver a specific piece of content. Okay, yeah, and that was what the person was asking.
Yeah, this is a rather manual testing and targeting, the matching of content to the intended audience. The way I've shown it here is an editorial process. It's something that you do by hand, but you can automate it. If you notice that this is starting to get out of hand, it's either too much for a person to manage, or it's just too boring to match content to so many audiences if you have a big content pool. You can automate it using, for example, those tags I showed earlier, so that a relevant piece of content or pieces of content is picked up based on a tag rather than an editor identifying a particular piece. And we have a few clients that are really pushing the envelope with this. There's a client in the retail sector that has such a large pool of content items and so many different audiences that they handed the matching of contents and audiences to an artificial intelligence engine. They essentially developed a rule engine that picks the matching content from this enormous pool. It's not something that the mainstream client would do, but eventually you may end up in a situation where on both sides you have so many options that the matching is not really an editor job anymore.
Antti, I don't understand what you can mean by by that being a boring process. I mean, editing hundreds and hundreds of extremely similar content items sounds like great fun. Right, another question about personalization, about performance, and perhaps you could cover the performance aspect a little bit again. So the specific question is, do having multiple components on a page impact the performance? Or does it call for a page variation instead? How does the caching work in that case?
Very good. So let's look at the documentation for component personalization. There's a section that discusses the issue of caching and performance. Or if there isn't, it's coming hot in the documentation pipeline. The way we do it is when a page is requested, we cache that particular page. And when a page variant gets requested, we cache that variant. With page variants, that's fairly simple. You end up filling the cache with those page variants as they get requested. If you're talking about component variants, let's say you have a single component on the page that has two variants. When a page with the first variant gets requested is matched to an audience, then we cache a version of that page with that variant's content. As the page gets requested for the next component variant, we again cache that. And this happens for all possible combinations of personalized components you might have on the page. So for example, you have two personalized components, each of them have two variants, so you cache component A original, component B original, component A original, component B variant 1, and so on. And we keep filling the cache so that each variant, when it gets requested, comes back in a performant way. This is the advanced cache for personalization module that does this today. Have a look at the documentation for that module. And I'll make sure that the component personalization page gets updated with that cache section that we already prepared.
All right, and I think we've exhausted the pool of questions. As always, oh, do you have something, Antti?
Yeah, I just want to advertise this release notes for 549. It talks you through the feature and also the options of bundles that you may want to download. Here on the right, all the bundles are listed, and you can see that some of them have that CP13N ID, which means that particular bundle has component personalization in it. And this blue box will help you make the choice of whether you want to use one bundle or another.
Okay. So hopefully this has been an interesting journey through some new features in Magnolia, but also personalization in general. We really appreciate your questions. I'm really glad that Antti could take the time to join us and walk through some of our recent work. As always, we'll share a recording of this on our YouTube channel in the webinars group. If you want to engage us afterwards, well, we'll be sending out a follow-up email that lists the resources, but also some notes to follow up a bit more on a few of the questions. If you've got other questions, write us, just respond to the follow-up email. And we're also pretty easy to engage on Twitter and all the other usual channels. We hope that you go on to do great and interesting things with component personalization, and we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. Thanks all.
Thank you very much from my point of view as well. Hope to talk to you about component personalization more and get in touch.